Sometimes games can stand the test of time and sometimes they don't. In this video, I'll be looking at 5 JRPGs that have aged really well and 5 that haven't. Now, one RPG with dragons that does hold up, is super fun, and as the sponsor for today's video is Dragon POW. And this dragon riding adventure game set in a fantasy world, you'll play as a dragon knight, journeying and growing alongside dragons with different attributes in an alternate realm. The dragons fighting by your side can not only counterattack enemies by devouring bullets flying at you, but also transform into beautiful girls. Each dragon girl also has tons of customization variety, from gear to over 100 skills you can combine to make unique abilities. The game also has this really cool comic book meets 90s cartoon aesthetic that I really dig. The game is designed for single-handed play, allowing you to enjoy it anytime, anywhere. So whether you're walking your dog, cooking, or just relaxing on the couch, Dragon POW's strong sense of impact and speed delivers an unparalleled control experience. And to celebrate the game's launch, you can get 111 draws and 4 dragons for free just by downloading and playing the game. Oh, and did I mention that Dragon POW received recommendations from both Google Play, the App Store, and 4.5 stars from Pocket Gamer, as well as reaching the top spot on the iOS free chart on the day of the open beta. So what are you waiting for? Start riding and training your dragons today in Dragon POW. I'll leave download links for you to check out in the description below. And now, back to the video. Now, what's made Chrono Trigger hold up so well over time is how ahead of its time it was. First of all, those battles. At the time, most JRPGs had battles where you would swirl into some other kind of battle arena, but with Chrono Trigger, the battles would just start right on the map where you would encounter the enemy. Also, the sort of non-linear storytelling. You're constantly hopping around between different time periods and experiencing the story in different ways, so one person's playthrough could be totally different from somebody else's. Not to mention the fact that the game has multiple endings and was really the first to coin the term New Game Plus, where your progress from beating the game would carry over into a fresh new file. And the visuals still hold up incredibly well today. They look fantastic, especially if you play maybe like the PC version or some new updated version. Now, a lot of people would say, how would it look in HD 2D? I think it would look absolutely incredible in HD 2D, but in fact, it still looks pretty good with what we've got today. And how do I know it holds up well? Well, the fact is I didn't play it that long ago for the very first time, and I was constantly surprised and wowed by all the different things the game could do. I kept thinking to myself, I'm gonna try this and it's not gonna work, but it did. Overall, it was super compelling and super fun, and definitely holds up really well to this day, and I would suggest playing it if you haven't already. Now, this next one really breaks my heart because I considered it a top 10 all-time JRPG, but I recently played the remaster and, well, I was just bored. When Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch released in the West in 2013, it was the shot in the arm that JRPGs needed. It was a great throwback style game with a world map, just had a very classic feel, that gorgeous Studio Ghibli art style, and a heartwarming story. And this was all in an era when JRPGs were at their lowest. I mean, this was during the Final Fantasy XIII era. Dragon Quest and Kingdom Hearts didn't even have a mainline console release that entire generation, so to say the least, JRPGs were kind of in trouble. Then why does it not hold up very well today? Well, to put it simple, it's just boring. Most of the quests have you going around getting different emotions, and you would grab one from one character and then give it to someone else. It's essentially a basic fetch quest, but you don't fight. And speaking of combat, it's very passive. You have these sort of familiars that will come out and they will just attack automatically, and at certain moments you can either block or do a big attack, but for the most part you're kind of just sitting there. And despite the remaster being gorgeous, running at 60 frames per second, nostalgia only carried this game so far for me, and I ended up giving up. In retrospect, I may have been a little too hard on Ni no Kuni 2. It looked just as good and had way better combat, not to mention that really addictive town building gameplay. Now, speaking of town building, let's talk about a JRPG that's about to be re-released and definitely holds up well, and that's Suikoden 2. Suikoden 2 is considered by many to be one of the greatest JRPGs of all time, and for good reason. It has incredible storytelling, a super cool combat system, a big variety of gameplay, especially at the time, and a visual style that still really holds up. Now, as far as that story goes, it starts with a bang right away, hooking you all the way until the end. You just are on the edge of your seat and you always want to know what happens next. Not to mention that addictive game loop of recruiting characters and constantly building up your base. Because there's 108 to recruit, there's always something to do, somebody to add to your team, some way to make your base stronger, and so that never gets boring. And the combat system had a 6-party battle system, which very few, if any, other JRPGs were doing at the time, so it made it super unique and is still really unique today. Not to mention the large-scale battles and the Iron Chef minigame, which is very beloved by fans. And as far as the visuals go, at the time it was kind of a toss-up what developers wanted to do with their visuals. Either it was pixel art or some kind of crude 3D. However, in my opinion, I feel like the games that went with the pixel art held up much better over time, and Suikoden 2 is one of the better looking games on the console. Now, the upcoming remasters will likely adjust a lot of the flaws and make it more playable, but overall this game still holds up really well. Now, one PS1 game that did get a remaster and still doesn't hold up is Saga Frontier. I mean this with all sincerity. The only good thing that came out of the Saga series is that it inspired Octopath Traveler, which is way better. It popularized this idea of multiple characters crossing paths across a non-linear story, but that's about all the good it ever did. Saga Frontier in particular does not hold up well at all. The visuals do this weird pre-rendered look kind of thing, and it kind of looks like Donkey Kong Country, but worse. The combat works, but is kind of just boring. You're just sort of hitting attacks, hitting enemies. It's not all that interesting. And the thing that is really annoying that doesn't hold up well at all, and I'm shocked that the series is so adamant at keeping this, is the Final Fantasy II inspired leveling system. Essentially, you don't level up traditionally. You're not getting experience points and leveling up, but instead, as you're fighting enemies, you just get random level ups for random stats, and then you randomly gain new abilities. So it's really hard to feel any sense of progression. Also, these games are infamous for not guiding you at all. Now, not giving the greatest guidance was pretty common at the time, but in Saga Frontier, it's particularly bad. They'll just drop you in a situation and go, good luck. And because this game is so open and there's so many areas to go, you can be lost for hours and hours and hours if you don't know what you're doing. And I recently played the remastered version, and it's still really unfun. It just doesn't hold up at all. Not to mention a lot of difficulty spikes. Like I said, Saga Frontier limped so Octopath Traveler could run. And I'm shocked they're still making these Saga games today, but of all of them, I feel like Saga Frontier holds up the worst. Now, moving on from one PS1 JRPG to another, let's talk about The Legend of Dragoon. At the time, this was one of the best looking, biggest budget RPGs of all time, and it was touted as the Final Fantasy killer. At the time, everything wanted to try to kill Final Fantasy because it was so big and so popular. I mean, Legend of Dragoon did look good for the time. It had huge, gorgeous towns, tons of CG cutscenes, and at the time, a pretty innovative battle system. But if you try and play this today, boy, oh boy, does it just not hold up at all. Now, I think the PS4/PS5 port really exposed just how badly this game is held up. With higher resolutions, you can really see the details in characters and monsters, and some of them just look downright goofy. Now, I will say the towns still look pretty solid. Those have held up overall, and same with the nature. Like, there's this one scene where there's like a waterfall kind of going through this river that I think looks really good. As far as the combat goes, back in the day, there wasn't much innovation in turn-based combat. It was kind of straightforward. You know, Final Fantasy was trying to be cute with like the junction system in 8, but for the most part, it was pretty straightforward. And in Legend of Dragoon, you do these sort of timing-based combos, and it seemed cool and seemed really new. However, those just seem really slow and annoying now. I'd give anything to just speed these battles up. They're so tedious, so annoying, and especially with the Dragoon transformation and those abilities, those take forever as well. Not to mention the absolutely awful voice acting, the bare bones localization. I mean, they give almost no flavor to this world, story, and characters. I loved it back in the day, but it simply doesn't hold up well at all in 2024. Now, recently, Grandia got its HD remaster ported to PlayStation and Xbox. Despite its quality of life updates, I think the original game holds up better, and the main reason is the visuals. In the remaster, they kind of do this weird smoothing filter, and it looks muddy and it doesn't look really good, but the original keeps that beautiful pixel art. One of my favorite styles from that era was pixel characters on 3D backgrounds, kind of doing the HD 2D thing before that style was in vogue. I just think it looks really great, and it holds up really well today. And as far as the story goes, it's a classic one of a young boy going on an adventure, trying to follow in the footsteps of his father. He goes and sees the world, makes friends, falls in love. Now, that seems pretty tropey, but this was the game that made it a trope. But I don't know, I think there's something about this game that still holds up despite the fact that it's tropey. And as far as the combat goes, it's really interesting. It's kind of distance-based and turn-based at the same time. So you're constantly having to kind of, position your characters in a way so they don't get hurt by big attacks, but also are close enough to do big damage. And you also have a huge variety of party members, and something this game did that I haven't really seen any other JRPG do since is you constantly have main party members coming and going. Now, that could be a good or bad thing, but it's pretty innovative, and like I said, I don't really see other games doing that today. And I will say there's some shockingly decent voice acting. Of course, it's a very 90s cartoon vibe, but much better than Resident Evil and a lot of the other games that were trying voice acting at the time. Now, I would honestly encourage you to pick up the straight ports on PS4 and PS5 versus the remastered version, as it has way better visuals, and the loss of some quality of life features might hurt, but overall I still feel like this is the better way to play it. But one PS1 JRPG that also had pixel characters on 3D environments that doesn't hold up well at all is Dragon Quest VII. Despite being the best-selling PS1 game in Japan, this game already felt dated when it released in the West in 2001 and holds up even worse today. By the time it came out in the West, Final Fantasy IX was already out and played and looked leagues better. Dragon Quest VII felt like it was on the wrong console in a lot of ways, looking and playing very old. It's interesting because it almost feels like a late Super Nintendo game, whereas Final Fantasy IX almost felt like an early PS2 game, so they just felt so opposed in that way. And by today's standards, it's incredibly archaic. It has really basic first-person turn-based combat with no unique twists to anything you're doing. The character models were pixelated, but I don't know, they just don't look good. They look small and chubby, and I don't know, it just doesn't hold up, I don't think. And compare that to, say, something like Grande or Xenogears, and they're not even in the same league. It's also incredibly long, with most playthroughs clocking in at over 100 hours, and there's just no way I could see modern gamers finishing that. And despite receiving a remake on the 3DS in 2016, even that game doesn't hold up, I don't think. Now, I will admit that the visuals look much better, but gameplay-wise, it's just as archaic, long, and boring. It's a shame considering the next entry, Dragon Quest VIII, is one of the best in the series and definitely holds up. Talk about a game that needs a proper remaster and not a demaster like it got on the 3DS. But one game that did receive a remake recently yet still holds up super well is Super Mario RPG. An RPG starring Mario isn't anything new by today's standards, but at the time it was mind-blowing, especially being able to team up with Bowser. Who would have ever thought that? And what's wild is all these years later, I still think this might be the best Mario RPG ever made. Now, why is this game held up? Well, it's got a simple yet charming story, great visuals, fun gameplay, and timeless music. And let's talk about that pixel art. It's very expressive on the characters. The way they emote looks amazing, super vibrant colors, it looks incredible. Like I said, the animations are great. And I don't know, you don't always need bleeding edge visuals to tell a great story or to have a game feel compelling. And as far as the combat goes, it was simple yet challenging turn-based combat. Now, it did have sort of timing-based attacks where if you choose an attack, you have to either time a button press at the right time to attack or block. It was very innovative at the time, and it's still really fun today. And unlike Legend of Dragoon, you're not doing these big, long combos. You're either doing like a one-time press or rapid taps, so I think it just holds up much better in that respect. And also in terms of other gameplay, it had a good mix of exploration and platforming. Now, I think that's the one area where it doesn't hold up, and they didn't even really fix it in the remake because most of the game is at this isometric angle, so it can be really hard to judge jumps when you're doing platforming, but other than that, it's great. And the music, oh my god, it's still amazing. Those tracks still slap today. Yoko Shimomura is a genius and has been doing great works for decades and well deserving of her Lifetime Achievement Award at GDC. Now, honestly, I would recommend the remake as it has a lot of great additions, new visuals, and quality of life features, but if you only can play the original, it still holds up amazingly well. But you might want to get your torches and pitchforks for this next one because you're not going to like my next choice. There's no doubt that Earthbound was incredibly original, charming, and creative for the time. Never before had we really seen a game starring kids in a modern setting using everyday objects to fight monsters. There was tons of neat ideas that were mind-blowing at the time. That said, Earthbound just doesn't hold up in the gameplay department at all. I will say visually, it still looks pretty good. There's really vibrant colors, great design, it's hard to knock the visuals. But man, is it an absolute chore to actually play this game. Combat is from a first-person perspective, and it's pretty basic, not very visually interesting, although the sort of slow tick of HP is interesting, where you can sort of heal yourself back up before your HP ticks down to 0. But other than that, it's just slow and boring. And constantly having to go to the bank to withdraw money is insane and becomes so annoying as the game goes on. It just doesn't make any sense. Not to mention you lose half your money and you have to pay to revive your party members when you die, so it's so brutal. Most games just have you restart from the last save, but this is different. And honestly, I'd rather just restart the game than lose half my money and have to trek back to somewhere to revive my dead party members. Not to mention the limited inventory space. You're constantly having to call the delivery person to drop stuff off or go somewhere to drop stuff off. And also, what's with the bike only holding one person? I get that it's realistic, but come on guys, it's a game. This just isn't fun. You're like, ooh, I get the bike. Just kidding. No, you don't. And oh my god, the game is just constantly stopping. Like your dad's calling, telling you to either stop or rest or whatever. And then there's like photo guy that's coming to take your picture. It's just like, stop, just let me play the game. There are so many other small nitpicks I could list off, but I'd be here all day doing that. Now I get it. I understand the nostalgia for a lot of people and it had some fresh ideas at the time, but in no way does this hold up to modern standards. I really wouldn't recommend playing this for anyone that didn't grow up with it without some kind of heavily modded version that fixes a lot of the game's nonsense. And I don't even know if something like like that exists. Let's end this video on a high note with a JRPG that has held up incredibly well and desperately deserves a port to modern consoles, and that's the greatest strategy RPG of all time, Final Fantasy Tactics. No matter which way you slice it, Final Fantasy Tactics is an absolute masterpiece. It tells the story of a kingdom fighting over power, whether it be fighting for the throne or fighting over powerful magical orbs called Zodiac Stones. There's lots of political intrigue, backstabbing, double-crossing, and everything in between. It stars a young man named Ramza who's from a royal family who's just trying to do what he thinks is right, power of the throne be damned. And I wouldn't dare spoil the ending, but it's incredibly impactful to say the least. The visuals and the music are both fantastic. There's something about great pixel work that just holds up well versus those early days of crude 3D. And the OST is just downright magical. I get goosebumps to this day listening to it. So many powerful, uplifting, and somber tracks. But where it truly holds up the best is in its gameplay. Final Fantasy V introduced the Final Fantasy job system that's used in countless other games today. But I feel like in Tactics, it perfected it. Here you can mix and match all kinds of different abilities from different jobs. But because it's a strategy RPG, there's many more opportunities for unique builds. For example, you can equip movement and counter abilities. So let's say you put on float with your characters, you can kind of float above the map, or if someone hits you, you can counter by using a potion. And those are just two examples of many. No other game with a Final Fantasy style job system really has those. And if you know what you're doing, you can absolutely break this game open in so many fun ways. Now I could be here all day gushing about the game, and maybe I will in a dedicated video, but in my opinion, no JRPG stood the test of time better than Final Fantasy Tactics. Hopefully that rumored remaster/remake is on its way soon, because I just want to play this game again on modern consoles. Now most of these are really well known, you've probably heard of them, but to check out some super weird hidden gem JRPGs you probably haven't, be sure to watch this video next. And special thanks to Reset Switch, Tyler Kuzawa, and the Miyazaki Man for supporting me over on Patreon. To get exclusive videos and other cool perks, consider supporting me over on patreon.com/thegaming shelf. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.